Energy in Store is a project where we are bringing together experience and expertise from inside the museum, in curators, in conservators, and expertise from outside the museum, external researchers. And in particular, we've brought together people who are specialists in the history of technology around energy. The idea of bringing these groups together for a series of discussions and visits is to explore how they can better share their expertise and what kind of things they can learn from each other.
We're really hoping that through this project we'll have a really good understanding of the challenges and issues facing an external experts wishing to engage with the collection. One of the things we're hoping to do is to actually inform future thinking for the Science Museum around how they present their collections to the public in their future planning.
We wanted to work with people who had some sense of what the stored collections in the Science Museum group were like and the kinds of possibilities that they had. So we started out by asking people who'd already worked with the Science Museum, who had already used those collections. And from there we sort of moved to build a slightly larger group of people who had that shared interest in the history of energy.
About 3 or 4 years ago, I contacted the museum archives about an engine that a group of us were interested in building. The museum arranged a visit to Blythe House to see the engine and to take some measurements. That was the last I heard until early last year. Then had an email come through saying would I be interested, and couldn't help but jump at it. It's an absolute chance of a lifetime. The first visit of the project was at Blythe House in London at the Small Object Store. Then in November we visited the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester, and that was followed by the Large Object Store at Wroughton in Wiltshire in April.
The external experts have been saying that it's actually quite hard sometimes to get access to these objects that the Science Museum and lots of museums have in their collections, that the time it takes to make an inquiry, even who they place that inquiry with, can be really complex and confusing process for them.
This project's been very, very educational in understanding how the internal procedures work and how difficult some of this is. We sat down in 2 little workshops groups and listed out the steps that were involved from somebody like me making an inquiry to actually physically seeing the objects. And I think there was 22 steps on one of the pathways.
When I was particularly interested in the Maudsley engine, it was an email with a quick reply. I had no idea of the process that kind of set in motion with that initial email. Behind the scenes, it's a lot more involved than I ever expected.
The museum staff are aware of the time it takes to get a response to a researcher application. And the researcher, if he's new to the game, doesn't have any feeling for what is actually involved. I think the museum could help itself by explaining this.
The website has to be clear how the inquiry will then be handled, to whom it will go, how it will be passed around, and if you're lucky, an expectation of how long it might take to get a reply.
To open up the access, I think the digital side of it is the initial key, and also spreading the fact, or really highlighting the fact that there is digital access to it. I've discussed collections with friends connected in that field, and the bulk of them had no idea that the collections were even accessible online.
The younger generation is even more, they assume that this stuff is available. And you've actually got to, get on a train or a plane or something to go and look at stuff, then people may not bother. So it is an absolute no-brainer that the more information there is about the object and the better the quality the images are of the object, the more valuable those systems are.
It's very easy to put in a search term. It's also very easy to get bombarded with a lot of results.
There needs to be enough available at the front end for someone to know whether they are going to need to know more or whether it's not worth worrying about and they can move on to something else.
Not all of the search results are populated. Often no image a small amount of data. Anything that can be done to add the information to an object, from actually what it is to its history to the people around it. Yeah, brilliant.
My personal achievement so far in using the catalogue has been extremely poor. There's lots of obvious things I should have been able to find that for whatever reason didn't come up.
As we saw when we had the session with Jamie, there's some stuff that needs to improve with the catalogue. Also, fundamentally, there's just is only 5% at the moment on it. So as more comes online and as the quality of data is increased, then it should become more usable.
I knew the collections would be big. I had no inkling of physically how big. I don't think the general public have that sense of what sits behind the scenes.
You come in this place and it's like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, when you turn the lights on with a clunk and then the lights warm up and gradually everything looms up out of the darkness and people go, oh wow, this is quite a thing.
Not everything that's in storage is ever going to go on exhibit or on loan. A lot of it's not exhibitable or loanable. That people don't really want, but it is interesting for people doing research. And this is why I'm presuming we have kept it.
We depend very heavily on physical examination of the object, because often the documentation doesn't tell the whole story. We're interested in these objects at a level where you're looking at a lot of detail. You'd need an immense degree of photographic coverage to get anywhere near the same amount of information you can get from climbing around the object.
You can see a photograph, but it gives you not necessarily a true idea of things like colour and actual shape and weight and mass and bits that move and bits that don't and things like this.
If it was a letter, for example, or a blueprint, seeing it electronically, potentially, that's enough, that does the job. If it's something that's been manufactured, then you can get a lot more from seeing it in the flesh. In terms of the object, you see the tools, for example, the craftsmanship that's gone into it.
I want to know what the engine's made of. And in that case, I not only want to see it, but I want to take pieces off it to measure and analyse.
In an ideal world, I'd want all the stuff to do with steam prime movers in one place. At the moment they're spread all over the stores and some of them are in a different store. The problem with that fundamental idea is there's lots of small objects associated with these. There may be some parts, there may be some documents. Ideally you'd like all them together, but then that wouldn't fit the racking terribly well.
Where things have connections, it's useful to maintain that. With the larger objects, the chances are the things will be either in many pieces. They may be in crates, they may be in lots of different crates. The crates may not all be in the same place.
One of the kind of interesting topics of discussion has been trying to find ways to better connect people and information. So, for example, we've seen that the researchers are really interested in contributing more information to the museum about the objects that they hold.
Getting the right people in front of the objects that you want answers about, you want information about, is kind of invaluable. There's something very special about having the insight of an expert on site with the objects and the curator and that kind of triangulation that happens.
Not every member of the museum staff can be an expert in every field. It would be nice if that person has got that bit of specialist knowledge, that particular anorak in that field, can just feed something back in.
When you have someone who's done that sort of work, researching on our collections, they bring in a lot of in-depth knowledge which won't necessarily be held by the museum already. There's so much stuff that as a curator you aim to have a broad overview of all of your collections, an in-depth knowledge of the most important ones, but you can't hope to know every single individual object.
I think it's very important that the results of a piece of research should be incorporated in the museum's records. And in fact, I think that should be a principle of granting access, that anything you find will be reported back to the museum.
People like to see things which are hidden away, but they're allowed to find them, if you like. There's something sort of engaging about that process.
I think it opens up huge possibilities, to be honest. You go into a museum with the intention to look at one thing, potentially you just see something, you get that association, can send you off down a whole different avenue of research.
Because the database is so huge, I'm going to put in keywords. And because I put in keywords, I'm not going to find anything that doesn't happen to have that keyword in. Whereas when I wander around the stores, I'll just trip over stuff. One of the great joys of browsing around the stores for me is literally just browsing and tripping over stuff you wouldn't expect to find there.
There's a huge range of challenges around physically getting people to come and see the collection. As you can see, we're in one of the hangars at our Wroughton site. It's huge. There's masses and masses of stuff. So once you've got to the site, which is relatively out of the way, it's a question of how do you get in amongst the objects to have a look at them up close. And when you're dealing with this sort of object, if you want to say, okay, we want to take it to pieces, we want to look inside, it's not just a case of putting your cotton gloves on and looking at it, but you're dealing with lifting gear, forklift trucks, lots of manpower and muscle.
We have to move out of our existing stores in West London. The government is going to sell that building, so they are very generously funding us to relocate the objects to the new National Collection Centre building at Wroughton. And that will mean that we can bring in more people more easily and give more access to external researchers and to our own staff. What we're doing starting this month is collecting data on every object. We'll be photographing every object, hazard checking it, condition checking it, packing it, and then they start to move down the motorway from 2020 when the new building is constructed and ready for occupation. By investing in moving the collection, stabilising it, putting it in better storage conditions, we should be able to cut out some of the steps of the process that slow things down at the moment. This project is unusual in that the output is almost the process itself. So the sessions bringing people into the stores have thrown up all these points about how we access things and so on. We've seen the experiences of researchers really vary depending on which of our sites they come to, who they contact first and that kind of thing. So there's an opportunity for us as we start to design the new building and how it operates, we can directly feed in everything that the group have been telling us. What's also come out very strongly from this project is the researchers' desire to see all the information we hold about the objects as well as the objects themselves. And that's making me think about how we can potentially in the future invest more in digitising the paper-based material that sits alongside the objects.
What was interesting to me was that the Science Museum Group was actually investing in this project. To pay that level of attention to the needs of people from the voluntary sector like me was a major, major plus.
I had no idea about the bureaucracy or the legal implications of collecting and researching things. That has been a revelation to me, and I now understand much better what the difficulties are. Until
now, it hasn't necessarily been clear to some of the people working in the voluntary sector, enthusiast historians of technology, exactly how much effort goes into preparing their visits. Equally, I think that the museum has learned from this project how it can make better use of the kinds of activities that those researchers are engaged in, and I think maybe see more possibilities for sharing ideas and sharing information in the future.
By bringing in the people we have for this project, I've had my eyes open to how particular types of object work or how they were used or what makes them rare and special. The group here have been very, very generous with their knowledge, and hopefully the other flip side that we would like to get better at is capturing the products that researchers then generate and making sure that they pass us a copy back of their research that we can then hold with the other information about the objects in the future.